Welcome to Meow Diaries, stories designed to help you relax and fall asleep. Tonight I have prepared a new story for you. Before we start the story, I would love for you to support the channel. Just click like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments how you are feeling tonight. It means a lot to me, even if it's just a word. But before we begin, I would like to share a little secret that can help you relax and fall asleep more easily. Instead of just listening, try to imagine each scene vividly. The colors, the sounds, even the smells. The more your mind gets into the game, the more it will calm down and gently guide you to sleep. Let's take a deep breath. Slowly, and exhale gently. Again, inhale and exhale. Feel your body relax. Feel your thoughts begin to fade away. Now, find a comfortable position, close your eyes, and let's begin the story. The first snow came without warning. No soft gray hours or muttered forecasts. Just a silence that pressed against the windows until, all at once, the world outside dulled into white. The rooftops looked rubbed out, and the gum trees, dusted, strangely, bowed like they'd forgotten how to hold themselves upright. But it wasn't the snow that unsettled the narrator. It was the absence, one so clean and sharp it felt like a thread had snapped somewhere just out of reach. She was gone. The cat. No name offered, just she, as if a name would have made it worse. It was early before sunrise when the narrator noticed. The kettle had just begun its low grumble, and the floorboards still held the cold of night. There was no tail curling round ankles, no low trill from the doorway, just a wrongness that clung like steam to the walls. They hadn't seen her slip out, not through the window latch, not the back screen door, which they double-checked by pressing their palm against the mesh to see if the pattern still matched her usual path. It did, but there were no prints. Nothing. The cat door, rigid with age, was locked from the inside. They never used it. It was more ornamental than functional, stuck long ago when the house shifted on its stumps. But still, it clattered softly as if touched by breath. The narrator walked the room slowly, calling her name once, then not again. Names can echo too much when they fall in the wrong spaces. In the hallway they found it. One single paw print, still wet, stuck impossibly to the ceiling. The smudge glistened faintly in the dull morning light, no bigger than a thumbprint, but shaped with unmistakable pads and claw points. It shouldn't have been there. The ceiling was high, the print inverted, like she had walked upside down through something that didn't follow rules anymore. They stared for a long time. At first they thought it might be soot or smudge, but no. It shimmered faintly, the way damp things do just before they dry. And that's when the house shifted, not physically, but in tone. The air pressed tighter around them, thick with a memory they couldn't place. It wasn't the first time someone had vanished in snow. The kettle clicked off. The sound startled them more than it should have. It was too sharp, too real. They poured the water without thought and left the mug untouched on the bench, fingers curling instead around the old iron latch of the hallway cupboard. Something compelled them. Behind it, just coats, dust, and something else. A scent they hadn't smelled in years. Musk, faintly floral, like crushed petals and earth. The scent of their mother's gloves, kept from a time before the grief settled in. She had once told, them cats carried things, not just mice, but feelings, luck, warnings. She sees them first, she'd whispered once, eyes on the cat's steady gaze at the blank corner of the room. That's why she waits near the windows. The print on the ceiling dried before their eyes, fading not like water, but like breath on glass. They walked to the bedroom, slow, expecting, almost. The bed was still made, the blanket still dented, where she'd slept the night before. They pressed their hand to it, cold, no fur. But something was different. A low, mechanical hum, barely audible, came from under the floorboards. A sound like a distant engine, or a purr too large for one. Throat. They knelt, listening. It stopped the moment they leaned close. And then, with a whisper so quiet it might have been the blood in their own ears, they heard it. She's not lost. She left. Their breath caught, but they didn't rise. There was no one else in the house. The snow outside thickened, coating the window panes with an opaque film. They touched the glass. Inside it was warm. But outside, in the yard, a figure moved just behind the lemon tree. Pale. Not walking. Drifting. Too tall to be her. Then it was gone. Back in the hallway, the ceiling now bare, they felt the house breathe. Just once. A deep intake, like bracing. They stood still, knowing something had begun. Not today. Not even last night. Much, much earlier. It was still warm in that room. The rest of the house had given itself to winter. Floorboards chilled from beneath. Doorknobs too cold to hold. Air curling inside the lungs like dry smoke. But this room resisted. The door had been shut all morning. Yet when the narrator pressed their palm against it, it radiated a low, steady heat. Not the kind born from a heater or a shaft of sun. No. It was the kind of warmth left behind by a body, by something that had only recently vacated. That warmth, strangely specific, clung to the timber like breath. The door opened without a creak, without resistance, without even the whisper of hinges. Just the soft exhale of air, the kind of shift that lifts curtains even when the window stays closed. The room looked unchanged. The same old mismatched quilt spread over the narrow bed, the wooden shelf above it holding two tiny ceramic birds, their beaks once touching. The small cupboard stood as always, its left door refusing to close fully. It was exactly as it had been every day for years. Except today, it felt like it had been waiting. And on the center of the bed, laid with uncomfortable precision on the fold of the blanket, sat a small toy mouse. Hessian, red thread for stitching, a single black bead remaining where the other eye had once been. Not one the narrator recognized, not from this house, and not something they remembered ever purchasing. Their cat had never played with toys. She wasn't the playful kind, more watchful than curious, more attuned to movements that shouldn't have been there than to those that belonged. Bells, plush mice, strings, all of it had once been offered, ignored. And yet, here it was. The toy mouse rested with such quiet intent that the narrator didn't dare cross the room to touch it. Something about its placement, too centered, too composed, made it feel like a signal, or worse, an invitation. And then there was the scent. It hadn't been there moments ago, and now it clung faintly to the air. Something floral, not powdery or fresh, but old and secretive. Pressed petals, dried blooms, the kind kept in envelopes beneath floorboards. Honeysuckle, perhaps, or mimosa. Hard to say, but the smell summoned a memory of warmth against skin, of being held before loss had a name. Without meaning to, the narrator stepped forward. A floorboard clicked beneath their heel. Just one, and it sounded less like wood and more like the soft snap of a camera shutter. The mouse didn't move, but it now seemed somehow more aware of them. They glanced toward the mirror above the dresser. Oval-shaped wooden frame, dust gathered on the lower edge. Their cat had never been able to see herself in it. It hung far too high. Yet now, visible in the half-shadow along the base, were claw marks. Not scratches from rough play, but deliberate. Vertical. As though she'd once tried to climb high enough to see something that she could sense but couldn't reach, and then the fingerprints. Small, smudged, oily, spread faintly across the glass like those left by a child pressing in too close. 4 fingers, no thumb, one fainter than the rest. That's when the warmth shifted. Not in temperature, but in tone. The comfort had drained slightly, replaced by something expectant. They turned quickly, suddenly certain they weren't alone, but the room was still, the bed untouched, the birds unmoved. But no, their position had changed. One of the ceramic birds now faced the door, its beak aimed away from its twin. It had turned, not by much, but enough to be unmistakable. The narrator didn't breathe. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. They couldn't recall hearing it before. Its sound was unfamiliar, sharper than expected, hollow. And from beneath, the bed came a sound so low it almost escaped attention. A rumble, not quite a purr, not quite a growl. Something deeper, like a storm heard from a great distance. They knelt slowly. The space under the bed was dim, dusted with shadow and lint, but not empty. One object, a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the crease. They reached in, fingers brushing the edge of it. Unfolded, it revealed no writing, no ink, just a single, stitched word, done in the same red thread as the toy mouse. Wait, that was all. They dropped it instinctively. The warmth in the room now felt almost stifling, like too many blankets piled over the chest in the dark. Not oppressive, but watchful. And then the sound of claws, light, clicking, unmistakable, scattered across the hallway, quick, skimming the timber. The narrator stood, heart caught mid-beat, hands clumsy against the door. They rushed to it, pulled it open, half expecting to see her again, half hoping not to. The hallway was empty, still, but the front door now stood ajar, opened wide to the thickening snow. Cold crept in around the frame, and next to the doormat, clearly visible, impossibly precise, 2 prints in the fresh drift. One feline, one human, bare, small, side by side. The snow had deepened overnight. Not dramatically, just enough to soften edges, erase tracks, and make the world outside feel slightly more unfamiliar. But inside the house, something else had shifted. The narrator noticed it before opening their eyes. A pressure in the air, a density to the silence. It wasn't just quiet. It was thick, like sound had been pushed out, and only waiting remained. There was a strange metallic taste in the room, the kind left behind by old blood or iron left in the rain, but subtler, like the memory of metal more than the thing itself. When they stood, the air felt denser around them, as though someone had just left and taken something important with them. They moved through the house with a different posture now, shoulders unconsciously hunched, as if expecting to bump into something no longer quite visible. By the fireplace, on the cat's resting mat, lay something that hadn't been there the night before. A collar, not the one she wore. This one was older, cracked leather softened by time, its buckle slightly bent. A small silver bell hung from it, and an oval tag, worn nearly smooth, bore a single name, Mina. The narrator crouched, their hand hovering over it without quite making contact. The leather radiated warmth, real, undeniable warmth. Not from the long-dead fire. It felt like it had just come off the neck of something living, but it was not the warmth that disturbed them. It was the sound, or rather the lack of it. The bell didn't ring, not even when they nudged it. They flicked it again, harder. Still, no sound. Not silence, but refusal. It was as if the bell knew it wasn't supposed to make a noise anymore. The absence of that tiny chime rattled them more than it should have. They didn't want to keep it, but they didn't want to leave it exposed either. Carefully, almost ritualistically, they placed it in the drawer of the hallway table, tucking it under receipts and the long-dead torch. The drawer closed with a soft click that seemed too final. The air shivered again, Something was building, not loudly, but insistently, like static behind a wall. At the kitchen window, the snow was falling in slow, determined flakes. Watching it, the narrator remembered something they hadn't thought of in years. A dream, maybe, or a memory misfiled. A cat, gray, maybe black, they couldn't recall, watching from the end of a dark hallway. And someone, a voice they trusted, had once said, "She shows up before something ends." A watcher. The phrase clung, too specific to be made up, too eerie to dismiss. And then the kettle screamed. They hadn't turned it on. The sound knifed through the silence, sharp and unnatural. They moved toward it cautiously. The dial was off. No steam, no light. Yet the scream persisted for another second, shrill and without source, then cut out mid-note, as if severed. The air collapsed, around it. Behind them, fabric shifted. A chair moved. They spun around. Nothing. Just the kitchen. Just the cold. But when they entered the bedroom, their pulse skipped. The toy mouse was gone. The bed was undisturbed, the blanket smooth. In its place now, in the exact same center-placed position, sat a photograph. An old one. A photo they hadn't seen since childhood. They recognized it immediately. The backyard in summer, overgrown and gold-lit. On the back, in their own childish scrawl, the words, "Me and Minna. She likes the tree." Their hand trembled slightly as they turned it over. There they were, 6 years old, smiling without restraint, arms around a cat, the same cat. Or her double. Her eyes the same clear amber, her ears slightly notched. But that wasn't possible. That photo had been lost in the fire, the one that had taken the shed, the storage boxes, all the old childhood things. They stared, hollow-mouthed. Not just at the impossibility of the photo's presence, but at the reality it implied. That she had been with them longer than they understood. That perhaps she had always been with them, in one form or another. The clock on the wall ticked again, louder this time, like footsteps on timber. And from far beneath the house, from somewhere impossible to reach, a bell rang once. Not sharp, not metallic, but soft, muffled by time and dirt. There was a moment, brief, silent, but absolute, when the narrator knew with a clarity that hurt. The cat had not left the house. Not by the front door, not by any window, not even through the forgotten vent behind the laundry sink that she'd once used as a kitten. That certainty settled on them like a weight, not all at once, but gradually, as they retraced every room, every exit, every place a creature with soft feet and sharper instincts might pass through. Nothing disturbed. No loose mesh. No shifted curtain. No bent fly screen. Every exit was still locked from the inside. It wasn't possible. And yet, she was gone. Not missing. Gone. That word felt different now. More deliberate. More final. The hallway held a strange stillness, heavier than before. The air had a smell now. Not rot, not mildew, but something dry and granular, like old cornmeal or moth wings crushed between pages. It was faint, but persistent, clinging in the throat. The narrator paused at the wall near the coat rack. Something about the plaster felt uneven, as if it had swollen slightly overnight. They placed their hand flat against it and felt warmth, radiating from a spot that should have been ice cold. Beneath the wallpaper, they heard something subtle. A sound like pages turning. Not fast, just once. One page. Then stillness again. The living room was untouched, but different. The light, coming through the window, seemed duller. Not gray, but slightly tinted, like someone had rubbed ash on the glass from the outside. On the table sat the same drawer they'd hidden the collar in, It was open by a few centimeters. The receipts on top were undisturbed, but the collar was no longer beneath them. In its place, a short length of red thread, curled like a dropped eyelash, its edges frayed. The bell was gone. They didn't remember moving toward the mirror, but found themselves in front of it. Their own reflection stared back, but the background was wrong. The hallway behind them, reflected in glass, had no coat rack, no table, just wall, bare, blank, featureless. It didn't match. They turned to look behind them. Everything was in place. The rack, the table, the photo frame, but in the mirror, only wall. And then, in that false hallway reflection, something moved. It was fast. Small, low to the ground, a blur, just outside the frame. The kind of movement you don't notice with your eyes, but feel in your stomach. The narrator froze. Their own eyes, in the reflection, seemed wrong, too alert, too bright. They backed away. The reflection did not. It held the gaze one heartbeat too long before catching up, snapping back, into sync. In the dining room, the chairs had shifted positions. Nothing dramatic. Just half an inch this way, a nudge that could have been accidental, except the pattern was deliberate. All 4 chairs now pointed outward, away from the table, as if something had once stood at the center and the furniture had recoiled. Then came the cold. It drifted not from outside, but from beneath. The floorboards exhaled it. Sharp, mineral-scented, like limestone soaked in creek water. The scent of somewhere buried. They walked slowly to the back door and paused. Frost had webbed across the inside of the glass, and embedded in it, not etched, but frozen into the pattern, were tiny claw marks. No larger than a matchstick, angled like punctuation. Not an escape, a message. The narrator didn't open the door. They couldn't. Something in their body refused, a quiet refusal born not from fear, but reverence. Whatever had left those marks wasn't trying to get out. It had already gone. They turned and saw the mirror again. Only now, it reflected a different time of day. Dusk, not noon. Long shadows, impossible light. They walked back to it, slowly, cautiously. In the frame, the front door stood ajar, snow blowing in. A figure at the threshold, not stepping in, waiting. Bare feet, eyes low, holding something in its arms. A cat? No, a bundle, swaddled in dark cloth. The narrator blinked. The image was gone. The mirror now reflected only them, and behind them, the hallway, as it should be. And yet, in their ears, they heard a familiar sound, a sound they hadn't realized they missed until now. The soft pad of paws crossing timber. Then silence. Then a breath, just over their shoulder, warm and animal, not quite purring. They turned. Nothing. But on the wall to their left, drawn faintly in red thread, now stitched into the wallpaper like veins, a door. Not real, but detailed. And its handle was turning. The house was breathing. Not metaphorically, not in some poetic, wistful way. It was drawing in air, slowly, rhythmically, as though the walls themselves had lungs beneath the paint. The narrator felt it in the floorboards first. A faint rise and fall, barely perceptible, but unmistakable once noticed. As if the house were preparing for something. As if it had begun to anticipate a return. But not hers, not the cat's. Something older. That morning, the kitchen felt wrong in a new way. The corners were darker, not shadowed, just deeper, as if the angles had stretched by half a degree in the night. And the smell had changed again. Beneath the soft layer of dust and citrus oil, There was now something faintly sweet and fungal, like decayed wood, mixed with the dry perfume of old flower petals ground to powder. The mirror still refused to behave. It had gone blank for a while, flat, unlit. But now it had resumed its tricks. A new pattern emerged each time the narrator passed, sometimes a different chair position, sometimes a door open that was closed, in the real world. But today, it showed something else. The trapdoor, the one beneath the laundry shelf. Closed in reality, wide open in the glass. A memory stirred. When was the last time they'd even looked beneath the house? Maybe not since the first winter, when the pipes burst. They didn't want to go down, but the air pressed them forward. The hatch opened with more ease than expected. The hinges didn't protest. The smell that came out wasn't damp. It was cold. A strange, wrong cold. Dry and brittle, like snow that had been stored in paper. They shone a torch down, but the light felt swallowed. Not because it was dark, but because the space didn't reflect. Everything below seemed covered in a thin, chalky whiteness, and the beam of the torch hit it without bounce. Just absorption, like shining light into ash. They climbed down slowly, boots crunching against something soft but granular. It wasn't insulation, it wasn't dirt. It was snow. Real, crystalline snow, collected beneath the house in dense drifts that made no sense. There had been no leak, no burst in the walls. The snow was clean, too clean. And resting on top of it in a neat, deliberate arrangement, a ring of bones. Small, pale, hollowed. Not feline. Bird-like, maybe. Delicate enough to suggest fragility, but positioned with an intent that turned the space ceremonial. At the very center of the circle, a silver bell lay half buried. No chain, just the bell, the one that hadn't rung. The narrator stepped back instinctively. Their boots slipped slightly on the frost-slick floor, and they steadied themselves against one of the wooden beams. It pulsed beneath their palm. Not with warmth, but with rhythm, like the thump of blood, a heartbeat in the timber, the pulse of something ancient, layered into the grain. They pulled their hand away. The wood beneath their skin had left a faint impression, red lines etched like the imprint of tiny claws. A wind moved through the crawlspace. No opening, no draft. Just a soft breath that stirred the frost without melting it, and it carried a sound. Not a voice. Not quite. More like a memory of a voice. A cadence half forgotten. The kind heard once from the back seat as a child, when a parent whispered a warning without looking. She watches until the threshold is crossed. Then she chooses. The narrator stood perfectly still. The bell didn't ring, but the frost around it had begun to melt in a perfect circle, as though warmed by an invisible hand. They crouched again, not to touch it, but to see what lay beneath. And there, embedded in the snow like a pressed leaf, was a nameplate. Brass. Worn. No screws. Just set into the earth as if it had always belonged. The engraving was faint, but the letters unmistakable. The name Minna, followed by a date they did not recognize. 20 years too early. Before they'd moved in. Before they were born. They backed away. The snow around their boots whispered, folding in on itself with a softness that felt too animate. The trapdoor above creaked, not from movement, but from weight. Something had returned to the surface. Something walking lightly across the floor. They climbed quickly, not panicked, but driven. The air above was warmer. The smell had shifted again. Honeysuckle. Stronger now. It clung to the walls, to their hair, to the hallway like steam. And in the mirror, their own reflection no longer matched the angle of their body. Their reflection looked to the side, toward the bedroom door, even as they stared forward. And then, perfectly synchronized, both versions turned. She was standing in the doorway, or something that looked like her. She was standing in the doorway, but she wasn't. Not exactly. The silhouette matched, the curve of the spine, the way her head tilted slightly left as if listening for a sound just beyond human hearing. But her eyes. That was the first thing the narrator noticed. They didn't catch the light, not the way they used to. The cat's eyes had always mirrored the room, windows, lamps, firelight, even the moon. But this version absorbed light like velvet, deep, unreflective, not blind, but unreadable. The moment held, long enough to make the air feel thick. Then, the figure moved, not forward, not away, just shifted, subtly, like an image adjusting to fit a different frame. The narrator didn't speak. They couldn't. Their throat had gone tight, not from fear, but from something older. Recognition. The cat, if it was her, stepped into the room with a grace that didn't quite belong to gravity. Her paws didn't sound against the timber, floor. Not even a whisper of claws. Just movement. And then she leapt, not up, not across, but into the armchair by the window. Her old spot. Except she hadn't sat there in years, not since the storm. The cushion flattened beneath her weight, but the fabric remained uncreased, untouched. The narrator watched. She did not blink. There was a memory in the room now, not a presence, a replay. It came back in pieces. A child in the hallway, a voice, warning from behind a curtain. She's not always yours to keep. You know that, don't you? A question asked too softly to argue with. The narrator blinked, and the room returned. But something had shifted. The air had thickened into warmth, the kind that shouldn't exist during snowfall. And on the side, table, where there had only ever been a lamp, now sat a glass of water. Clear, cold, beaded with condensation. They stepped closer. The cat looked at them but didn't move. Her body didn't rise or fall with breath. Her ears didn't flick at sound. She just watched. And when the narrator spoke, her name, softly, she tilted her head the other way, as if hearing something else behind the words. Something not meant for this room. And then came the click. From the kitchen drawer, sharp, metallic, not a creak. A mechanical certainty, like a key turning in a lock. The narrator moved toward it, but something stopped them. Not a force. A sound. Underneath the floorboards again. Low. Hollow. A rhythmic tapping, steady as a heartbeat. And then it changed, became a pattern. 3 slow knocks. Silence. 2 quick taps. 1 long drag. Not random. Familiar. They'd heard that rhythm before. Childhood again. Knocked on walls when playing alone. The cat would always come when they did that. She'd place her paw where the sound came from, press once, as if answering. The narrator knelt beside the chair. The cat stared at the window. But the outside world had blurred. The snow had stopped falling, but the glass now reflected something else entirely. Not the garden, not the street. A room. This room. But darker. As if watched through a lens not entirely human. And in the reflection, behind the cat, stood a figure. Faint. Not moving. Dressed in long shadow. No features. Just the outline of someone waiting. They turned sharply. The room was empty. The mirror was gone. The glass was just glass again. But the water on the table was warmer now. The condensation had dried. And then, the cat spoke. Not in words, not in sound, but with her gaze. A shift of eyes to the far door. The one that never opened. The one they had sealed years ago behind the bookshelf. She looked at it, then back at them. She had remembered something, and now it was their turn. The door creaked. It happened slowly, then all at once. The house exhaled. The breath it had been holding for days, or perhaps years, released itself in a single long sigh. The windows did not rattle. The floorboards didn't creak. But something within the walls loosened, as if a long tensed muscle finally surrendered. The narrator stood before the sealed door, the one that had always been more memory than fixture. Behind it, a bookshelf sat heavy with dust, unmoved for a decade. But now, its presence felt temporary, performative. The cat, or what wore her shape, remained in the chair, watching. Not in anticipation, in knowing, as if she'd already seen this part unfold. The narrator didn't drag the shelf aside. It slid, effortlessly, as though it had never truly been fixed. Behind it, the old door was unchanged. Paint blistered, handle dulled to bronze by time. They reached for it and paused, their hand trembling with something that wasn't quite fear, not dread, something quieter, like reverence. The handle turned too easily, and what lay beyond was not darkness, but a corridor they didn't remember building. The space smelled of honeysuckle and frost. The walls were smooth, unpainted, carved with shallow grooves, claw marks or symbols. They couldn't tell. Sigh, the end of it, a pale light glowed. Not electric, not natural. The color of memory, of a face seen in sleep and forgotten upon waking. They walked slowly, each step muffled by the strange silence that blanketed the corridor like gauze, and with every step, the walls pulsed faintly, like lungs under skin. The light grew, not brighter, but nearer. When they reached the end, there was no door, just an opening, a frame, and beyond it, snow, still falling, but rising too. The snow didn't behave like snow. It moved upward as well as down, folding into itself, circling. In the center of the clearing stood the figure, vague, unthreatening, draped in the same quiet the house had worn all week. They didn't speak. They only raised one hand, pointing downward. At their feet, barely visible in the frost, were pawprints, leading in every direction, some recent, some ancient, some doubling back over themselves, spiraling inward. And then the figure stepped aside. At the center of the pattern lay the cat, herself again, small, curled, eyes closed, not in death but in rest. She didn't stir as the snow gathered around her, didn't shiver as the cold touched her fur. The narrator moved forward, knelt, reached, but their hand met only air. She was there, tangibly, impossibly there, and yet untouchable, as if she existed just 1 second behind the present. They whispered her name, the one she had carried in this life. Then the other name, the old one, the forgotten one. Minna. Her ear flicked. The snow stopped falling, and then everything shifted, not with noise or flash, but with absolute stillness. The kind that only exists in the final moment before waking. The figure was gone. The corridor dissolved behind them. The snow beneath their knees melted, soaking into their skin. And the cat opened her eyes, looked at them once, then turned. She walked, slow, into the white, her tail leaving no mark. Back in the house, morning arrived unnoticed. The air was warmer now, not with heat, but with something settled. The mirror showed only what was there. The door remained open, but behind it, only wall, only shelf, only dust. And on the cat's resting mat, still faintly warm, lay a single thread of red, curled like a question mark. Outside, The snow had melted in perfect circles. At their centers, tiny green shoots had begun to rise,